All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight, presented by FanDuel here at The Volume. Happy Friday, everybody. Congrats on making it to the weekend. We have our 2022 NBA champion, and we are going to get into all of those Golden State Warriors storylines today. We're going to talk a little bit of X's and O's. Not too much because it doesn't mean nearly as much now that the series is over, but I'll share some thoughts about why I thought the game went the way that it went. We'll talk a little bit about Boston and some of their shortcomings that were on display in this series, but a lot of Warriors today. I want to talk a lot about why I like to root for teams like the Warriors. We'll talk a little bit about Steph and where this puts him all time. And then at the end, I want to give a special shout out to Joe Lacob. So we got an action-packed show for you today. Really quickly before we get started, if for whatever reason you missed it last night, I went live with Colin Cowherd right after the game. We went for about a half hour. I thought it was a very, very interesting show. Colin had a lot of interesting insight about the Warriors and their financial health and a lot of the flexibility that provides them. We got into some talk about the Warriors fan base and how loud and big and loyal they are and the reasons why we think that's the case. I thought it was a really interesting show. So if you missed that, check it out. It's on the Volumes YouTube channel. You can also find it on the Colin Cowherd podcast feed. Also, a couple quick hitters. Subscribe to the Volumes YouTube channel. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT. And if you, for whatever reason, miss any of these YouTube videos, you can find them on my podcast feed, which for the time being is under Lakers Tonight. But I wanted to start with like a macro topic like I usually do. And in this case, it's why I like to root for teams like the Warriors. You guys hear me talk on this show a lot about the difference between process and results. Don't get me wrong, results are all that matters. The goal of this is to win at the end of the day. But, in small sample sizes, you can get deceived by results. For instance, if you have bad offensive process, but guys make a handful of really tough shots, you can score, right? And you can trick yourself into thinking that things are going well when they're actually not. That happened to Boston a lot in this series. That's why we key in on the process. What are you doing to get those results? Because if it's good process, then it's replicable, then it's dependable, then it's consistent, and it's something you can depend on to carry you in the long term in your goal of trying to win a championship. That's why I key in on process. But every once in a while, you'll see bad process lead to an NBA championship, right? I won't even say bad process, but less than great process. The 2020 Lakers are a great example of this. They won an NBA championship basically on the strength of LeBron James coming to the Lakers, convincing Anthony Davis to join him, Kawhi Leonard somehow choosing to go somewhere else, and Frank Vogel being the perfect coaching fit for that group, who then got all of those role players to buy in, and then inside the locker room, they had really good process. But from the top down organizationally, the Lakers are still a disaster. They've always been a disaster as long as Jeannie Buss has been at the helm. That's just been kind of the way they are. And one of the things I like about what the Warriors did is even though they have the result of the trophy, meaning they accomplished the ultimate goal, I thought from the top down, they had really good process. And I think it's important for teams like the Warriors to win because I think it's important to set that example and to celebrate that example so that more teams are willing to do that and so that we can appropriately call out the teams that are poorly run. And it goes from the top down. Joe Lacob is incredibly committed to this team and is willing to spend whatever it takes to make sure that they have the pieces they need to get the job done. Going down to basketball operations department. Bob Myers is not Rob Pelinka. He's in the weeds. He understands what wins in the modern NBA. He would never build a roster full of guys that are 6'2" and shorter. He understands. He's got the work ethic and the intelligence and all of the ability that it takes to construct a roster in the NBA that's capable of winning a championship. You guys remember, those of you who have been following me longer than this playoff run, you guys know I've been talking about this Golden State roster a lot. They have a ton of wings. They have a lot of guys between 6'5" and 6'9" that can defend multiple positions and that can dribble, pass, and shoot. And there were good players on their bench that would have made Boston's rotation, especially with how bad Boston's bench was. Bob Myers is a great example of an NBA GM that does the necessary work and understands how to build a modern NBA basketball team. That's a credit to him. Going down to Steve Kerr, I think Steve Kerr, him and Eric Spoelstra are the two best coaches in the league. And not only were they patient, Golden State, in their hiring process to get the right guy, they empowered him early on. And credit to Steph and Draymond and Klay, they bought into Steve Kerr. And then to Steve Kerr's credit, he adapted over the years. A lot of Warriors fans will tell you that Steve Kerr was a little rigid early on. And he has been willing to make the adjustments to adapt to what the game needs from him today, not what the game needed from him when he was a player for the Spurs or when he was a player for the Bulls or when he was an executive for the Suns. That's a credit to Steve Kerr. So we got good process from ownership, good process from the basketball operations department, and good process from the coaching staff. We go down to the players. I compared Steph last night to Tim Duncan, and we're going to get into that a little bit more here in a minute. But just simply in terms of leadership, I've commonly said that I think Steph is the best leader of this era. He is incredibly even-keeled, never too high, never too low, bought into the coaching staff, coachable, sets a great example, plays hard on the defensive end and sets that example to his teammates. And it isn't passive-aggressive, isn't demonstrative in a way that causes problems within the locker room. He's just the consummate leader in the NBA. And then going down the roster to the role players and the way they've bought in, as I'm saying here, Golden State's process was great. And I like to see when good process leads to good results, because this is how it should be done. You should be rewarded for hard work. You should be rewarded for doing things the right way. I like it when the NBA represents a meritocracy. I don't like it when I see one ultimately great player in LeBron with another great player in Anthony Davis and a great coach in Frank Vogel masking and covering up massive organizational shortcomings. It bred the overconfidence that led to the demise of the Lakers over the course of the next couple of seasons. So I'm just really glad that the Warriors won, and that is why I root for teams like this. I want to see them succeed. Let's talk a little bit X's and O's. I did think this game was particularly interesting in the way that Golden State came back to win. I obviously expected Boston to win big in Game 6, and I was wrong. That happens. Golden State, credit to them. They came in a really difficult environment, got punched in the mouth, fell down 12-2, and just methodically worked their way back into the game and did so quickly over the course of the end of the first quarter. There were two specific things that I thought were the driving force of that comeback that caused the dynamic of the game to shift and for Boston to fall apart. The first is Golden State's defense. Those of you guys who watched my breakdown of Game 5, that was my biggest takeaway from the film. The dynamic on the perimeter shifting from Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown getting wherever they wanted on the floor because they could get consistent dribble penetration to suddenly that dynamic flipping, and all of a sudden, like, Andrew Wiggins has Jayson Tatum on lock. All of a sudden, Draymond Green has Jaylen Brown on lock. On switches or in the bench when Gary Payton II or Klay Thompson were on Tatum or Brown, they were locking down. I thought the MVP of the defensive end over the course of the end of this series was Klay. I mean, this is a guy who before his injuries was one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. But like he'd kind of lost that reputation because of the injuries, and he didn't look great defensively for the large part of this regular season and really for the large part of this postseason. He was dominant defensively, particularly on Jaylen Brown, who has a massive physical advantage over Klay, and it just didn't matter. You know, I say this a lot on my show during the regular season. There's two different kinds of defensive players in basketball. There are disruptive defenders and there are positional defenders. Disruptive defenders are up in your airspace. They do a lot of reaching and gambling. They typically cause a lot of turnovers, but they also cause breakdowns behind them when they get out of position. Those guys are usually freak athletes. They usually have incredible physical tools because they have recovery athleticism. So if for whatever reason they get beat or make a mistake or gamble and get out of position, they can get back into the play and make a play because they're incredible freak athletes. Like Gary Payton II is a great example of this. He can get up in your airspace. He can reach in. He can be aggressive forward because he's so incredibly quick and athletic that he can get back into the play. Klay Thompson is what I call a positional defender. Positional defenders usually give ground. They usually start the play giving a little bit of space. But they're not reaching, they're not gambling, they're not playing passing lanes. What they're doing is they're reading your center of gravity and they're consistently beating you to spots. And then they take contact in the chest, they wall up, and they make you shoot over the top. If you watch Klay Thompson over the last couple of games of this series, the defensive job he did, sliding his feet and staying in front of Tatum and Brown, was incredibly impressive. And it's a great example of like understanding what your set of tools are and catering your specific defensive style to what you're capable of. That, it kind of reminds me of like offensive tackles in the NFL. They always line up as far off the line of scrimmage as the referees will allow. And then the very first thing that happens when the snap is when the center makes the snap is 2 really hard steps back into the left. If you're a left tackle. Why? Because that defensive end coming at you is 40 pounds lighter and a freak athlete and is going to come with all these vicious moves, and you have to give ground to give yourself a chance to recover. That's kind of the way that Klay Thompson plays defense. I think it was incredibly impressive, and to take dominant athletes like Tatum and Brown and to control them the way that he did was a huge part of why this series flipped the way that it did. Draymond Green, for being not great defensively in the first 3 games, and honestly, that was another process results thing. Jaylen Brown was hitting incredibly difficult shots over the top of Draymond Green. For the most part, he was holding him in check. There was one play in particular in game 3 where Jaylen Brown did a jab and go on the right wing and toasted Draymond Green and got all the way to the rim for a layup. That wasn't happening often. It was a lot of Draymond holding him in front and making him shoot over the top, and he was just knocking down shots, and that's to his credit. He was incredibly disruptive around the basket below the rim last night. Every time Tatum or Brown or Horford would expose the ball out in front, Draymond's knocking that thing free. And for him to call his shot the way he did, down 2-1, not playing well, and step into CJ McCollum and saying, you're not going to have a championship just like the Celtics aren't going to have a championship. For him to do that and to close the deal was incredibly impressive. And again, I'm a big believer in celebrating that kind of thing. If we're going to celebrate stars aren't the only thing that win NBA games. LeBron and AD played in 21 games this year and they were 11-10. You need guys who are willing to do the dirty work. Draymond Green is the closest thing we have in the NBA right now to a star role player, and he needs to be celebrated. The second big thing that I was watching early in that game that I thought was a great indicator that Golden State was in good shape was they got early scoring from Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, and Jordan Poole. 10 of their first 18 points came from those guys. And as Colin and I had been talking about all series long in our post-game shows, we needed somebody other than Steph to get going because of how good this Boston defense was. And them demonstrating early in that game that they were comfortable was a great indicator of the way the rest of the game would go. That's why I tweeted that out in the moment. That's why I tweeted out in that first quarter that I thought the game was over. Because I could just feel the psychology shift as Golden State went on that run. Wiggins, Klay, and Jordan Poole combined for 45 points last night. Getting 45 points of offensive production from that trio is a home run. If you get anything from Steph at that point, you're winning the game. That triggered the run. They went up, I believe, 27-22, leaving the first quarter. It ultimately amounted to a 21-0 run. Again, one of the biggest storylines in the series. Long extended stretches of Boston dominance and then quick, decisive, lethal runs from Golden State. Boston lost that game by 13 points, and they gave up a 21-0 run spanning the first and second quarters. It was one of the biggest stories of the series. There were at least 3 games that I thought Golden State won decided by quick, short runs. But that's what great teams do. The great teams, they don't cause you to have, they don't cause you to get shaky. They cause you to implode. And Golden State frequently caused Boston to implode. Their decision-making gets even worse as things start to go off the rails. Most teams, most great playmakers, most great point guards, when you feel the train going off the tracks, that's when you need to become more disciplined. That's when you need to execute better than you usually do, because it's the only way to get that train back onto the tracks. There were comical decisions made by Boston guards in this game. There was a 3-on-3 in the first half. No advantage either way. Golden State was back. As a matter of fact, the seventh player getting back into the play was a Golden State defender. So it was basically a 3-on-4 with the fourth man kind of trailing. And Derek White just drove right into Kevon Looney at the rim. No advantage, no nothing. Kevon Looney was right there waiting. And of course, smoked the layup. And Golden State went running down the other way and they got a layup. Any really, really smart point guard is pulling that out, realizing they don't have the advantage, resetting the offense and trying to execute to get a basket because they know that's what their team needs. Late fourth quarter, there was a play. Boston was kind of going back and forth. They kept getting it down to 8 or 9, and then Golden State would get it back up to 12 or 13, and they'd get it back down to 8 or 9. Golden State makes a shot to get it back to 10. Marcus Smart just dribbles up the left side of the floor, jacks up a 3 off the dribble. Had no chance of going in, missed long. And again, it's you're Marcus Smart. You're not a great pull-up jump shooter. You're not even the best pull-up jump shooter on your team. And that was just you going rogue because you just felt like it was your turn to try to shoot, which is what low IQ offenses do. In this series, Boston attempted 19.3 pull-up jumpers per game. That was 25% of their offense. 1 out of every 4 shots that Boston took in this series was a pull-up jump shot. Here's the problem. They only shot 28% on those shots because they are not a good pull-up jump shooting team. By the way, Golden State attempted 28 pull-up jump shots per game. Here's the difference. It's Steph Curry, and it's Klay Thompson, and it's Jordan Poole. That's their bread and butter. They shot 42% on their pull-up jump shots because they are a good pull-up jump shot team. That's the kind of shot they need to hunt in their offense. Whereas with Boston, it should have only been a last resort. 5 seconds on the shot clock. We weren't able to get a better matchup. I don't have time to get to the rim or the paint's packed. Okay, fine, I'll take this shot. End of quarter situations. Only in that type of situation. Or if you're going against a Golden State pick and roll coverage and you come off the screen and you are wide open. Yeah, that'd be one thing. But no, it was a lot of really difficult pull-up jump shots. One of Marcus Smart's first shots of the game was a post-up on Steph Curry where he got into the lane and took an impossible Kobe fadeaway over his left shoulder. I'm like, what's the point of the post-up on a size mismatch if that's the shot you're going to get? And you're not Kobe Bryant. You're not Kawhi Leonard. You're Marcus Smart. It just is. It's truly confounding. It's been one of the more confusing teams that I've covered in my time covering the NBA. And those of you guys who have been listening to my show consistently, you know that I've been on this with Boston ever since the Milwaukee series. Turnovers, of course, were a huge issue. Everyone knew turnovers were their biggest issue. It was probably all they could talk about for 3 days, and they went out in a do-or-die game and turned the ball over 23 times. And this is where it gets tricky because there's going to be a glass half full way of looking at this. There's going to be a certain temptation to stand pat if you're Boston. Tatum's young. Jaylen Brown is young. Most of the players on the roster are young. Al Horford looked great. Marcus Smart is still in his prime. You don't necessarily have to make any monumental changes, right? The problem that I have with it is you're going to have a tougher route next year. Whoever gets out of the West is going to be every bit as good as this Golden State team, if not better, because it'll either be the better version of this Golden State team that has more help from their younger players or a team who is good enough to beat those guys. Chris Middleton back with the Milwaukee Bucks. The Miami Heat, I think, are going to add talent. Don't be surprised if Philly's better next year. It's going to be harder. And the book is out on you now. Everyone knows how to beat Boston. Switch all the actions that you can. If they're targeting specific defenders, you can do a hedge and recover, but you can even get away with switching there. And as long as your guys can contain a little bit on the perimeter, you can stunt and recover elsewhere and bait them into bad decision-making. because that's what they do. They will settle for bad jump shots. They will turn the basketball over. They don't know how to handle stunts or double. How many times did you see Jayson Tatum or Marcus Smart get doubled in the post yesterday and just immediately throw the ball away? They have a serious weakness in game management on offense. They need a high IQ player to get into the mix that can settle them down when things aren't going the way they're supposed to go. I will spend some time this offseason digging into the free agents that are available, guys that I think are realistic trade targets, and I will come up with some options there. I don't have them right this second, but that is something they need to target. And teams that stand pat and or let players go always pay the price the next season. Milwaukee not retaining PJ Tucker was a huge mistake. And if Boston does the same thing, if they stand pat or if they let a player go and they don't continue to reload, they might not have enough. And they might be right back in this position next year. I want to talk about Jayson Tatum for just a minute. So through the first 3 rounds, he averaged 27, 7, and 6 on 45% shooting, which is really solid. That, like, for your first, like, high expectation superstar maybe type of playoff run, or where you're expected to win, for him to perform like that, that's really good. But he fell apart in the finals. 22, 7, and 7 on 37% shooting in the finals. And I thought he was one of the largest reasons why Boston wasn't more competitive in this series. He got soundly, resoundingly outplayed by Steph Curry. And that chasm between those two guys was the difference between this being a 7-game series that came down to the final shot and Golden State winning 3 consecutive games where it kind of felt like they were in control. They needed more out of Jayson Tatum. So in that respect, I am disappointed. But he's young, and he's not exactly the first guy to get overwhelmed by the stage that is the NBA Finals. Hell, I think LeBron is the second best player who ever played in the NBA. He was overwhelmed in the 2007 NBA Finals. Now, it's different. LeBron was at a massive talent disadvantage in that series. That Cavaliers team was not equipped to hang with a team as skilled and smart and talented as the Spurs were. But you did see a little bit of that. Like, LeBron, even under that context, LeBron also didn't play nearly as well as he could have in that series. And Tatum was a great example. I said this before the series. I watched LeBron struggle with that. I watched Steph struggle with that against LeBron. And now I watch Tatum struggle with that against Steph. Experience, having been there before, being familiar with the stage, getting to say like, oh, road game 6, pivotal type of situation, closeout opportunity in the NBA Finals. I've done this before. I did it in 2015 to the Cavs. That type of, you derive confidence from that kind of thing. And Tatum didn't have that to lean back on. He's been in a lot of big games in his career, but never a game this big. And so if there's one thing he needs to, there's a boatload of things he needs to learn from this series. He needs to become a more consistent playmaker. He needs to be able to take better care of the basketball. His rim finishing was atrocious. He was below 50% in the restricted area in this series. That's unacceptable for a player of his caliber. He was way too focused on foul grifting, was doing that low gather where he extends his arms out to try to rip up to the rim, but he was never getting any calls there because no one was getting any calls. It's a physical NBA Finals series. But he was perpetually doing that, and all you're doing is exposing the basketball. Watch the way LeBron James goes to the rim. He tucks that thing like a running back as he's going into the lane because he knows everyone's grabbing and holding, and he's not going to get calls. Tatum kept going like this, and he kept just getting stripped. And as a result, he was losing control of the basketball as he was going up to the rim, and he couldn't finish. There was a lot for Tatum to take away from this series to let him know that he's not good enough yet. And I thought Ime Udoka had a really interesting quote after the game. And I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but the gist of it was, this is only the beginning of the way you are going to be guarded. This is what it's like when you're at this level as an NBA player. You're going to get hard doubles. You're going to get a defensive scheme that is entirely constructed around stopping you and making you feel uncomfortable. You're going to face a defensive scheme where a staff has spent months analyzing tape to find out what your weaknesses are and to specifically attack your weaknesses. And you have to polish those weaknesses enough to where they can't be capitalized on the way that they were. So I'm not going to, this isn't some like massive black mark on Tatum's resume, but he massively underperformed. I was disappointed because I expected more out of him, and he got exposed as having some weaknesses and he needs to address them. But all in all, like, it was a good playoff run for Tatum, and I don't want that to get forgotten. I just think that what happened there at the end wasn't a coincidence, and there are some things there that he has to work on. All right, I have two last Warriors topics that I want to hit on before we get out of here for the day. I'll start with Joe Lacob. I was very critical of him after Game 3 for taking that victory lap before the series about not trading the young guys. And he's been proven to be correct. And this is, the winner gets to tell the story. You know, the Toronto Raptors, Masai Ujiri, in 2019, made a very controversial trade for Kawhi Leonard. All the intel was that he was going to LA. You know, they gave up Danny Green and DeMar DeRozan. DeMar DeRozan was a fan favorite. DeMar DeRozan was literally just had finished a year where they had won 59 games, I believe, and he had received MVP votes in 2018. And then he ran into LeBron at the absolute peak of his powers and lost. But Masai Ujiri ignored all of that and gambled by going after Kawhi Leonard. There's a version of that story where they lose. There's a version of that story where Philly wins in Game 7. There's a version of that story where KD doesn't get hurt and they lose in the finals. Hell, there's a version of that story where they lose that crazy Game 3 to Milwaukee. They fall down 3-0 and they lose that series. But no, that's not what happened. They won and they got the trophy. They got the trophy, and as a result, they get to tell the story. That's the other side of this coin, right? Like, the Raptors cashed in assets and cashed in a franchise cornerstone for a better player who basically came in as a mercenary and won them a title. That's one way to do it. He gets to brag about that. Joe Lacob went a different way. Joe Lacob stayed the course, didn't cash in his assets, and it turned out he had enough pieces. And now he gets to take that victory lap, and I think that's cool. But make no mistake, they're two conflicting ideologies, and either one of them can work. Like, for instance, for me, and I know most Warriors fans would disagree with me, I'd still trade all the young guys. I'd be like, what can we get for Kuminga and Wiseman this summer to get another star in here so then I could go for a repeat? I can get Steph, Klay, and Draymond, Wiggins, and another really good two-way wing, and I could win a couple more championships in here. But that's just my approach. And I think it's cool that you can see that different approaches can win. And kudos to Joe Lacob for believing in what his approach was, being very confident in it, staying the course, and it panning out for him. And if it pans out well next year, these young players will develop faster, they'll be ready sooner, and they could potentially go on a long-term run of success. Before we get out of here, I wanted to talk about Steph. I talked about this a little bit last night with Colin. I won't get into the exact list for a while because I do want to spend a good amount of time this summer really diving into that. My lists are different than everyone else's. I don't compare bigs and perimeter players. To me, they play a completely different position. They play a completely different sport. To me, it's like comparing, Von Miller and Tom Brady. It's like, you could argue at their peaks, they were the best player at their position. I mean, definitely for Tom, maybe for Von Miller, but it's just, they don't do anything similar on a football field. That's the way I feel about a Shaquille O'Neal versus a Kevin Durant. That's the way I feel about a Bill Russell, versus a Larry Bird. I think perimeter players their job is to bring the ball up the floor and get people into spots and to make decisions with passing and to score from different spots on the floor. I think it's just a whole other level of basketball, different level of basketball. Not that the bigs aren't important. They are. Again, I think it's comparing apples and oranges. And so it's better to keep them in separate lists. So my list for perimeter players has pretty consistently been MJ 1, LeBron 2, Kobe 3, Magic 4, and then Larry Bird 5. And to me, Steph now has a real case to be over Larry Bird at number 5. I don't want to make a decision there yet until I kind of think about it more, because Larry Bird is, again, a different type of player in a lot of different ways. But that's insane to me. That Steph Curry, coming out of Davidson, falling in the draft the way that he did, being underwhelming, obviously because of injuries, the way that he was early in his career, to then fast forward a decade, and now I think he might be the 5th best perimeter player to ever touch a basketball. That's a remarkable accomplishment. I compared him to Tim Duncan last night, and I wanted to elaborate on that a little bit, because they're very different as players. But what to me, what makes them similar is they are the cornerstone, the perfect foundational piece for a dynastic franchise. I mean, look at the Miami Heat now. They're incredibly well run from the top down. Great owner, great general manager, great head coach, great star in Jimmy Butler, but he's just not good enough. And they just don't quite have enough talent, and so they keep falling short. In order to make that whole dynamic work, you need that foundational superstar. Tim Duncan, I don't think he was ever better than Shaq. Maybe 04, 05, right? Maybe. I don't think he was ever better than Kobe in the late 2000s. But he was right there. And that, in conjunction with everything else that the Spurs organization brought to the table, with him being 100% bought in to Greg Popovich, with him being a consummate professional, great leader, even-keeled, never too high, never too low, all of that kind of came together to be that perfect foundation piece for a franchise that won a title in 99 and then won one in 2014. An even more extended form of success than what this Golden State Warriors team has done. But I think the Steph comp is really interesting there, because I don't think he was better than LeBron from 2012 to 2020. And I don't think he's better than Giannis now. He had some years where it was like maybe, right? Like maybe 2016, but then LeBron kind of ended that resoundingly in the finals. Like maybe 2019, but it was like, but Kawhi was also really good that year. Maybe 2021. I thought he was the best player in the league in that regular season, but they didn't make the playoffs. And then this year, had a really rough regular season, but then was unbelievably good in this postseason. But like he never had that like resounding 3-4 year long stretch where it's like, I'm the best guy, which is why it reminds me of Tim Duncan. But the resume surrounding that is unassailable. 4 titles in 8 seasons, 6 trips to the NBA Finals, never any drama, never any passive-aggressive comments, never any subtweets to teammates. I think he's the best leader in the NBA. And this was an incredibly... This playoff run was the defining moment of Steph's career. He was amazing in 2015 and was a deserving champion, and I thought he should have won Finals MVP. But they got unprecedented injury luck on the way. Every team they played had their starting point guard get hurt. And in the finals, Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love went down, and they were just at a monumental talent advantage in that series. So even though Steph was amazing, it just didn't have that resounding feel of other championships that you see through NBA history. Then you have 2017 and 2018, and Steph obviously was amazing, but they had Kevin Durant, and they had significantly more talent than any team in the NBA. So those titles just didn't have that same feel as some of the other titles in NBA history. This year, first of all, didn't play in the regular season before the playoffs. I think he had it took 15 games off or something like that. His first basketball was coming off the bench in game 1 against Denver. Now, Denver was an easy matchup, but Memphis was not. And yeah, Ja Morant went down, but Memphis ended up actually being every bit as challenging to deal with post Ja Morant injury. And then Dallas, look, guys, what happened to Dallas looks a lot more like what happened to Boston now, doesn't it? Dallas was very good. Dallas beat that Phoenix team. But what happened was Golden State, with an incredibly smart game plan And with the pressure that they put on you as a confident champion, Dallas fell apart. And that's exactly what happened to Boston. But they beat a very good Dallas team in the conference finals. And then in the NBA finals, they beat a team that I consistently said, and I still believe, has a little bit more two-way talent. So that's an unassailable playoff run. That is the one that not even your greatest detractors could ever say a negative thing about. He was definitively the best player in all 4 series. He was monumentally important to everything that Golden State was doing. They needed him on the floor, and they struggled with him off the floor. It just was, again, the defining moment of Steph's career. I'll spend more time talking about where I rank him all time, whether or not I put him over Bird at a later date over the summer. We're going to spend a lot of time there. We'll talk about where he ranks in the league. We have a lot of fun stuff planned for the summer. But just, instant reaction here the day after the championship. He's in that conversation for the 5th best perimeter player to ever play the game. And his resume is now completely unassailable. In my book, he has 2 finals MVPs, but in the real book, he's got 1 now. So you can't even say that anymore. So I tip of the cap to Steph. He's become one of my favorite players of all time. There was a moment there in the 3rd quarter where he hit a big 3 and Boston called a timeout, and he was walking over to the bench and he was just looking at that crowd, and he just had this angry look of a man who just who wanted to just not just win but destroy everything that made the Celtics who they were. He wanted to snatch their heart, and he looked up at the crowd and he said, "Bring me my fucking ring." And I was like, this guy is such a badass. He's just one of my favorite players. So salute to him. Salute to the Warriors. I'd make them the early season favorite for next year as well. All right, before we get out of here, I did want to take just a couple of minutes to say some thank yous now that the season is over. We had a monstrously successful postseason run. I think we did, just on YouTube, almost 2.5 million views, which is just mind-blowing to me, because when I started this thing back in October of 2020, doing periscopes at my kitchen island, I was having sometimes as few as 3 people watching my live streams. And to see it grow from there to what it's become now, not just with the volume, but also before then, the way it grew with State of the Lakers, I can't even begin to describe to you guys how thankful I am for you guys supporting me and rocking with me during this last year and a half. This last 4 months has been such a blur to go from, guys, I grew up listening to Colin Cowherd, and I got to break down the NBA Finals with him after 5 of the 6 games. I got to appear on his show 6 times here in the last month. It's been an utterly surreal experience to get to talk to the people that I've gotten to talk to get to have the platform that I've been able to have. It's all because of you guys. And this is only the beginning. And I'm so incredibly excited to see where this all goes from here and to what we can build this into. And sometimes I just want to jump in a time machine and go forward 5 years and just see what we're doing and just see what it looks like and see how big of a community we've built. I'm really excited to build on this further this summer. I'm excited to get more interactive with you guys next season, to have better opportunity for you guys to get involved in this show. I'm just in general really, really thankful for the way this has all gone, and really, really excited for where it's going to go. And most importantly, appreciative of you guys for supporting me along the way. A couple of quick thank yous. Guys who helped make this show go forward every single day. Unsung heroes that deserve every bit as much credit. Ryan Brumley, my producer, did an incredible job keeping us on track on a day-to-day basis and producing the show. Carson, you guys know Carson hopped on with me a lot for the live streams. He's a freak talent. He's got this whole TikTok thing going on too. Photographic memory, just a basketball genius on so many levels. I'm thankful to have him on the team, and I'm excited to keep working with him. And then last but not least, obviously, there are a bunch of other people involved, but the last person that I wanted to shout out was Raj Chapalu, who I did Stay the Lakers with. I did 152 episodes of that show before we got picked up, and I think Raj was a part of about half of them. and he was absolutely instrumental to that growth. And he was incredibly loyal, incredibly hardworking, and did so much to help that channel to help that podcast get to where it was. Obviously, I've told that told that to Raj privately, and he knows that, and he's still a very good friend of mine. But I just wanted to give him a public shout out because there's no me here talking at the volume without Raj, and I hope that you guys understand that none of this stuff ever happens based on one person or any one talent or any one specific thing. But on that note, that's the end of the 2022 NBA season. Not going anywhere. NBA draft is next week, so we're going to get right back to it. But once again, congrats to the Golden State Warriors. Once again, thank you guys for supporting the show, and I will see you guys in a couple of days.